Hi, my name is Sam, and I'm 17 years old. Living in a quiet suburb, the new Walmart that opened nearby was a big deal. Before this, we had to drive over an hour to the nearest store. One Saturday afternoon, my mom and I decided to check it out. The excitement of exploring a brand new store quickly turned into a nightmare we never expected. The parking lot was packed as we arrived, the sky overcast and heavy with the promise of rain. My mom, always on the lookout for deals, was eager to explore. We grabbed a cart and entered, the bright fluorescent lights washing over us. The store was bustling with people, families chattering, and children running around. As we walked through the automatic doors, I felt a strange chill. The air inside was cool, almost too cool for the middle of summer. I shrugged it off as we headed toward the grocery section. My mom was in her element, scanning the shelves for the best deals on produce. I decided to wander off to the electronics section, more interested in checking out the latest games and gadgets. As I was browsing through the latest games, I felt a sudden chill. It was strange because it was the middle of summer and the store was well heated. I shrugged it off and continued browsing. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow move. I turned quickly, expecting to see another customer, but there was no one there. The aisle was empty. I shook my head and laughed at myself, thinking I was just being paranoid. I grabbed a game I had been wanting and started towards the toy section to look at the latest action figures. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I found my mom in aisle 13, comparing different brands of cereal. I joined her, idly scanning the shelves. That's when I noticed something odd. One of the cereal boxes was slightly ajar, and from the narrow opening, I could see what looked like an old, faded piece of paper. Curious, I pulled the box off the shelf and peered inside. The paper was yellowed with age and covered in spidery handwriting. As I unfolded it, a shiver ran down my spine. The note read, "Leave now, or you'll never leave at all." I showed the note to my mom, but she dismissed it as a prank. "Probably some kids messing around," she said, returning to her shopping, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that settled over me. As we moved through the aisles, I started noticing more strange things. In the toy section, a doll's head turned to follow us as we walked past. In the electronics aisle, a TV screen flickered on and off, showing static despite not being plugged in. And in the clothing section, the mannequins seemed to shift positions when I wasn't looking. My mom remained oblivious, chalking it up to faulty electronics and poor display setups. But I knew something was wrong. Things took a darker turn when we reached the home goods section. I heard whispering, faint but insistent, coming from the next aisle over. I followed the sound, leaving my mom behind, and turned the corner to find an empty aisle. The whispering grew louder, and I could make out words. "Help me. Trapped. Can't escape." I froze, my heart pounding. The voice was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Suddenly, the lights above flickered and then went out, plunging the aisle into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, using the flashlight to see. The whispering stopped abruptly, replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence. As I moved the light around, I saw a shadowy figure at the end of the aisle. It was tall, elongated limbs and eyes that glowed a faint red. I backed away slowly, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The figure started moving towards me, its movements jerky and unnatural. I turned and ran, nearly colliding with my mom who had come looking for me. "What's wrong?" she asked. Seeing the panic on my face, I tried to explain, but the words wouldn't come out right. I just pointed back down the aisle. We decided to leave immediately. As we hurried towards the exit, I could feel eyes on us, watching our every move. The automatic doors wouldn't open at first, as if something was trying to keep us inside. Finally, they slid open, and we stumbled out into the daylight. My mom was still skeptical. She couldn't deny the fear in my eyes. We got into the car and drove home in silence. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the shadowy figure and heard the whisper. The next day, I did some research online about the new Walmart. Surprisingly, I found several forum posts and comments from people in our town talking about odd occurrences. One person mentioned cold spots in the store, another described hearing footsteps when no one was around, and a few others had also seen the strange shadowy figure. One story stood out. Former employee had quit, after experiencing disturbing events during night shift. He described tools moving on their own, aisles rearranging themselves, and eerie laughter echoing through the store. He even mentioned a specific incident where a pallet of goods had toppled over without explanation, almost injuring him. Armed with this new information, I convinced my friend Jake to come with me back to the store. He was a skeptic, but agreed to help me investigate. We decided to go in the evening when it would be quieter and easier to notice anything unusual. As we entered, the atmosphere was heavy, and I felt the same chill as before. We started in the electronics section, where I had first seen the shadow. Jake laughed it off, saying it was just my imagination, but I knew better. As we moved through the aisles, we started hearing the whispering again. Jake's expression changed from amusement to concern. "Do you hear that?" he asked, his voice shaking. I nodded, and we followed the sound, which led us to the home goods section. There, we found the same mirror from my previous visit, now covered with a thick layer of dust. As we approached, the whispering grew louder, more urgent. I could make out words. Help. Trapped. Can't leave. Suddenly, the mirror cracked, and a cold wind blew through the aisle, sending chills down our spines. We turned to leave, but the shadowy figure stood blocking our path. Its eyes glowed a menacing red, and it reached out with elongated arms. Jake and I backed away slowly, our hearts pounding. Figure moved towards us, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on strings. We bolted, running through the aisles, but the store seemed to stretch endlessly. The aisles twisted and turned, leading us in circles. Finally, we reached the exit, but the doors wouldn't open. We pounded on them, shouting for help, but no one came. Just as we were about to give up, the doors slid open, and we stumbled out into the night. We didn't stop running until we reached Jake's car. As we drove away, I looked back and saw the shadowy figure standing at the entrance, its eyes burning red. We didn't speak on the drive home, the fear still fresh in our minds. Jake, now a believer, promised to help me figure out what was happening at the store. Over the next few days, Jake and I gathered more stories from other people who had experienced strange things at Walmart. We recorded their accounts, trying to find a common thread. One woman described seeing a ghostly figure in the children's section, while another man talked about objects moving on their own in the garden center. We also found old newspaper articles about the land the Walmart was built on. It turned out that it had once been the site of a hospital that had burned down in the early 1900s. Many people had died in the fire, and some believed their spirits still haunted the area. Determined to put an end to the haunting, Jake and I decided to confront the spirits direct. We returned to the store at night, armed with flashlights and recording equipment. The store was eerily quiet, the only sound our footsteps echoing through the aisles. We set up in the home goods section where we had seen the mirror. The air was thick with tension, and the temperature dropped rapidly. As we began our investigation, the whispering started again, louder and more insistent. The shadowy figure appeared, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. Jake and I stood our ground, determined not to run this time. We demanded to know what it wanted, but the figure only moved closer, its form shifting and twisting. Suddenly, the mirror shattered, and a blast of cold air knocked us off our feet. The whispering grew into a cacophony of voices, all pleading for help. I felt a cold hand grip my shoulder, and I turned to see a ghostly face inches from mine. With a surge of adrenaline, I broke free and grabbed Jake. We ran towards the exit, the voices following us, growing louder and more desperate. The doors wouldn't budge and panic set in. We pounded on them, screaming for help. Just as we were about to give up, the doors flew open and we stumbled out into the night. The voices faded and the cold air dissipated. We didn't stop running until we were far away from the store. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I had nightmares about the shadowy figure and the ghostly voices. My mom still didn't believe me, but Jake and I knew the truth. We continued to research the history of the land and found more stories of hauntings and strange occurrences. We even contacted a paranormal investigator who confirmed that the area was a hotbed of supernatural activity. Years have passed since that night. The memories remain vivid. The Walmart eventually closed, unable to shake the rumors of hauntings. The building now stands abandoned, a testament to the horrors we experience. Jake and I remain friends, bonded by our shared experience. We've both become more attuned to the supernatural, sensing things that others cannot. The gift and a curse. We've learned to live with it. Some places are touched by darkness, and once you encounter it, it never truly lets you go. The old Walmart is one of those places, a reminder that the past can haunt the present, and some spirits are never truly at rest. At 7:45 p.m. on December 7th, 2023, Claire Reynolds arrived at the old apartment building she had recently inherited from a distant relative. The building, crumbling edifice in a neglected part of town, was notorious among locals for its ominous history. Claire, the young woman looking to escape her tumultuous life, saw this as an opportunity for a fresh start, despite the building's unsettling reputation. The apartment itself was on the top floor and had not been occupied for years. The hallway leading to it was dimly lit with flickering bulbs and peeling wallpaper. The air was stale, and an oppressive silence hung over everything. Claire felt an immediate unease, but dismissed it as the building's age and neglect. On Friday morning, Claire began to unpack and clean the apartment. As she sorted through boxes and dusted off old furniture, she found peculiar items hidden in the walls. Old newspaper clippings about the building's tragic history, including disappearances and unexplained death. One clipping stood out, a report of a tenant who had vanished without a trace under mysterious circumstances. Later that day, while exploring the building, Claire noticed something strange. The building's layout was inconsistent. Hallways seemed to shift, and doors led to rooms that didn't match the building's blueprint. The building itself felt alive, its walls seeming to breathe and pulse. Claire attributed these experiences to her fatigue and the building's age. Saturday brought an unsettling discovery. Claire found an old journal hidden behind a loose brick in her apartment. The journal belonged to a previous tenant named Thomas Caldwell, who had written extensively about his experiences in the building. His entries detailed a disturbing presence, a shadowy figure that seemed to haunt the tenants and feed on their fears. Thomas described rituals he performed to appease the entity and mentioned a contract that tenants had to sign, though it was never clear what the contract entailed. The journal's final entries were frantic and incoherent, detailing a descent into madness as Thomas believed the entity had taken control of the building. That night, Claire experienced vivid nightmares of being trapped in the shifting corridors of the building. She woke up to find her belongings rearranged, and a new set of newspaper clippings on the floor, all detailing her own disappearance. Sunday was marked by increasingly disturbing phenomena. Claire found her apartment growing colder, strange drafts and sudden drops in temperature. The walls seemed to whisper, and Claire began hearing footsteps behind her, even when she was alone. Determined to understand what was happening, Claire revisited the journal and discovered a reference to a hidden room in the building where the entity was believed to reside. She decided to search for this room, hoping it might hold answers or a way to confront the entity. Claire's search led her to a concealed door behind a bookcase in the building's basement. The door was old and rusted. It creaked open to reveal a small, dimly lit room filled with bizarre artifacts. Ritualistic symbols painted on the walls, strange totems, and old, tattered robes. In the center of the room was an altar with a blood-stained ledger. On Monday, Claire discovered the ledger was a record of pacts made with the entity. Each entry detailed a tenant's agreement to a horrific arrangement. The entity would grant temporary respite from misfortune in exchange for a personal sacrifice, usually the tenant's sanity. The ledger ended abruptly with Claire's name written in a shaky hand, followed by a horrifying message: "The last tenant will never leave." The realization that she was trapped in a cycle of terror with no way out hit Claire like a cold wave. The building's malevolent presence grew stronger, and the entity seemed to be drawing nearer. Claire began to feel its influence, her thoughts becoming twisted and paranoid. Tuesday night was the culmination of Claire's torment. The entity, now fully manifested, appeared as a nightmarish shifting shadow with a myriad of eyes and distorted, wailing mouths. The entire building seemed to be alive, the walls closing in and the floors shifting beneath her feet. Claire attempted to flee, but the building's layout had become an incomprehensible maze, with rooms and hallways constantly changing. The entity's presence was suffocating, and Claire felt her mind slipping into madness as she was relentlessly pursued by the shadow. In a final, desperate act, Claire tried to perform a ritual she found in the ledger, hoping to break the entity's hold. But as she chanted the incantations, the entity's wails grew louder, and the building seemed to close in on her. By Wednesday, Claire was missing. The apartment remained eerily quiet, no sign of the struggles that had transpired. Neighbors reported seeing strange shadows and hearing cries for help, but the authorities found no trace of Claire or any evidence of her presence. The building stood as a dark monument to the entity it housed, and the story of Claire Reynolds became a haunting legend in the local area. The building, now even more decayed and derelict, was avoided by all, secrets sealed within its walls. The tale of the building and its last tenant served as a grim reminder of the malevolent forces that can dwell in forgotten places, feeding on the fear and despair of those who enter. Hi, my name is Lily, and I'm 17 years old. I live in a small town where nothing much happened, so when a new Walmart opened nearby, it was a big deal. It meant we no longer had to drive an hour to the nearest store. My mom and I decided to check it out one Saturday afternoon. Little did I know this trip would become the most horrifying experience of my life. It was a bright, sunny day, and the parking lot was packed with cars. Families were pouring into the store, excited to explore the new addition to our town. As we walked in, I felt a mix of excitement and curiosity. The store was huge, filled with shiny new products and bustling with activity. My mom gave me some money and told me I could pick out something for myself while she shopped for groceries. I wandered off towards the clothing section, eager to see the latest fashion trends. The aisles were wide and well lit, the shelves stocked with all sorts of interesting things. As I browsed through the clothes, I noticed something odd. A mannequin in the corner seemed to shift slightly, as if it had moved on its own. I glanced around, expecting to see someone nearby, but there was no one. I shrugged it off, thinking I must have imagined it, and continued looking at the clothes. A few minutes later, I felt a sudden chill. Air around me seemed to drop several degrees, and I shivered despite the summer heat outside. I looked around, but everyone else seemed oblivious. I rubbed my arms and decided to find my mom. Maybe I was just imagining things. On my way to the grocery section, I passed through the home goods aisle. As I walked by, I heard a soft giggle. It sounded like a child, but there were no kids around. I stopped and looked down the aisle. That's when I saw it. A set of dishes stacked precariously on the edge of a shelf, teetering as if they were about to fall. I approached the dishes, feeling a mix of curiosity and unease. As I reached out to stabilize them, the lights above flickered, casting eerie shadows on the shelves. I quickly pulled my hand back, my heart racing. I decided to leave the home goods aisle and find my mom as soon as possible. As I turned to leave, I heard the giggle again, louder this time. I glanced back and saw that one of the dishes had fallen and shattered on the floor. I found my mom in the grocery aisle, calmly picking out vegetables. I tried to tell her about the mannequin and the dishes, but she brushed it off, saying I was just letting my imagination run wild. I stuck close to her, not wanting to be alone in the store. As we continued shopping, strange things kept happening. Items fell off the shelves for no apparent reason, and I kept hearing faint whispers. My mom didn't seem to notice, but I was on edge, jumping at every little sound. We reached the freezer section, and I felt the chill return, stronger this time. The glass doors of the freezers were fogged up, and as I wiped one clean to look inside, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, written in the frost, were the words, "Get out." I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. I grabbed my mom's arm and pointed at the message, but when she looked, it was gone. She gave me a concerned look and suggested we finish up and leave. I couldn't agree more. As we headed to the checkout, the lights flickered again, plunging the store into brief moments of darkness. Each flicker seemed to last longer than the last, and I felt the air grow colder with each one. I clutched my mom's hand, my fear mounting. We finally reached the checkout, and I thought we were safe. But as we stood in line, I saw a shadowy figure at the end of the aisle. It was tall and thin, its features obscured by the darkness. Its eyes glowed red, and it started moving towards us. It tugged on my mom's arm, trying to get her to see, but she was busy paying for the groceries. The figure grew closer, its movements slow and deliberate. I could feel its malevolent presence, and I knew we had to get out of there. The cashier handed my mom the receipt, and we hurried towards the exit. The lights flickered one last time, and the store was plunged into darkness. I heard the whispers again, louder and more insistent. My heart raced as we reached the doors, which thankfully slid open. We practically ran to the car, my mom confused by my urgency. I glanced back at the store and saw the shadowy figure standing at the entrance, its red eyes burning into mine. I knew it was watching us, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. We drove home in silence, my mom finally noticing my fear. She tried to reassure me, saying it was all just in my head, but I knew better. Something was wrong with that Walmart. Something evil. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing the mannequin's eyes, the shadowy figure, and the words in the frost. My dreams were filled with darkness and whispers, and I woke up in a cold sweat. I tried to tell my mom again, but she still didn't believe me. For weeks, I refused to go back to that Walmart. My mom had to do the shopping alone, and I stayed home, terrified of what I had seen. I did some research online and found stories of other people experiencing strange things at that store. Cold spots, flickering lights, and shadowy figures were common themes. I wasn't alone in my fear, but that didn't make it any easier. Every time we drove past the store, I felt a chill run down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for me to return. Now at 17, I still carry the memories of that day. I've tried to rationalize it, to find logical explanations. The fear remains. Some places are touched by darkness, and once you encounter it, it never truly lets you go. That Walmart is one of those places, a reminder that the mundane can hide the most terrifying secrets. I've learned to live with the fear, but I'll never forget the horror I experienced there. And to this day, I avoid that store, knowing that some things are better left unseen.